Good day, Chris Cordani, Dr. Jerome Corsi's producer here, and welcome to the Truth Central. We have more as Dr. Corsi continues to move forward with his extensive work on efforts to inform people about dangerous voter roll algorithms in New York, Ohio, and other U.S. states. Dr. Corsi is now in Tulsa, Oklahoma to continue his investigation. So for today's The Truth Central, we take it to a conversation he had recently on the Joe Hoft Show, discussing his fight to expose and stop the use of these algorithms as part of the Real Steel series on The Truth Central. You can find out more about this effort and how to donate to help Dr. Corsi, Andrew Paquette, Dr. Carleen Graves, and the team expose this threat and stop the Real Steel through the website gods5stones.com. That's gods5stones.com. Or you can just use the QR code right here on the screen as you can see it. If you are watching, if you're listening, there is a link to gods5stones.com in the description. Now, here's Dr. Corsi's conversation on the Joe Hoft Show.
Lots going on in this country. One big issue, of course, has been the 2020 election and the steel. I've written 3 books about this topic and know quite a bit about it. And our guest here has got all sorts of information on it. It seems like everything. He's written a number of books. So it's my honor to introduce to you here on the Joe Hoft Show, Mr. Jerome Corsi. Welcome to the Joe Hoft Show.
Well, it's an honor to be with you, Joe. And the Gateway Pundit has helped me break this story. And I've been very, very pleased with all the work you've done at the Gateway Pundit. You know you have my strong support over many years. I'm a great admirer. Now, this story is a stunning story. We have found a computer genius came to me through a lawyer in Ohio, and he had found, working on the New York official Board of Election voter registration database, that it's encrypted. It has a code written into it, which is like a CIA code that allows for the rearrangement of all the numbers in the code. It's a whole cryptographic scheme to create false voters that yet can get legitimate state IDs and are available to the criminals in the pool to be used for mail-in votes that can be certified. It's an ingenious scheme, and he has published a paper. If you take a look at our website, our 501c3, which is God's 5 Stone, that's G-O-D, no apostrophe S, spell out the number 5, F-I-V-E, S-T-O-N-E-S, God5stones.com. That comes after the David and Goliath story, where David picked out the 5 right small stones, pebbles from the stream to get Goliath. You can see we've got a lot of information. Ohio has actually spent the last 3 weeks in Ohio. Ohio started an official investigation into their state Board of Election voter roll to see if it's encrypted with codes, and they are. This is a operation that's worthy of intelligence agencies. I think the intelligence agencies are running the scheme, and I'm going to give you a quick rundown of how it works, Joe. They renumber the database. So, for instance, they take away the date you registered out of the database. The scheme is in cryptography. It's like if you were marking cards and putting them back into a deck. So the first thing you got to do, you can't just open a deck of cards from the manufacturer and put the marked cards in there, because the manufacturer gives you the deck of cards in order by suit. So you have to shuffle the deck. So the first thing this cryptography scheme does, is it takes the entire New York voter registration database and it reshuffles the numbers so they bear no relationship to the date you registered. In other words, what it does is it says, for instance, everybody knows that, if you got children, my first child born, you know who that is. My third child, you know who that is. Well, the state says, of New York says, no, I'm sorry. Your first child is number 1. Your second child is number in our scheme is number 12. And your next child is number 23. Next child is 34. 45, and then 56. So wait a minute, I don't have 56 kids. I got 5 kids. Say, well, in our scheme, we've got 56 because between 1 and 12, we put 10 other children that came from somewhere else in our database. And by the way, 2 of those kids are false. Now, the point is, I can give all of those people legitimate state of New York IDs for voting. So they get a real ID, even though it's a fake vote. And then as the criminal, I can sort these cards back into the deck so you can't find them, but I can find them. And then as I want to, I can pull them out of the deck and vote that number because it's a real number. And then I can put it through machines and count it as a real mail-in vote. I've got a certifiable mail-in vote. It counts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's false. And if you're the Board of Election and you're watching this, you can't tell I'm doing it because I've created the scheme, I've penetrated your system, and I'm controlling your voting. And so in New York, they have as many as 300,000 of these fake rolls. There are as many as 2 million erroneous fake voters in the New York rolls. And at least 300,000 we've determined, Andrew Paquette did the work. His paper, which is a cryptographic paper, is on gods5stones.com. You can see it and you can read it. And this interview will be published on that website as soon as we get it from you. We're posting all these interviews. I'm doing a lot of interviews to explain this to people because what this means is that if I'm the intelligence agent running, and I think the intelligence agencies are running our elections. And I think this is across the country. We suspect this scheme is also in some 13 other states. And we're investigating those other states now. And if I'm running this scheme, Joe, I can tell you, well, how do you want Kamala's votes? Do you want her to win by 1%? Do you want her to win by 5%? Do you want her to win by 10%? Do you want her to come up later in the day? Do you want her to surge overnight? Because, see, I can vote my fake mail-in votes, picking those cards out of the deck. I know where they are. You don't. All day long. As many as I want. That I can get them through and certify them. So in 2020, I watched all these improprieties, all these ballots coming in the middle of the night and being run through the machines. I said, this will never certify. But yet they did. When Andrew Paquette figured out this scheme, now I know how they certified those elections. And we're calling for an investigation of this. We don't want people to go to vote in a casino that's rigged. And we believe the casino is rigged in perhaps every state board of election data, which is shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell you what, Jerome, this makes sense to me. In my past life, I used to be an auditor. I was a corporate auditor. I was actually head of a big team out of in Hong Kong. I lived there for about a decade and ran basically an auditing shop for a Fortune 500 firm. So one thing that we would do is often we'd compare our data with client data. We'd go out and have these massive sets of data that we would compare. We'd slam them against each other. We'd have to then also make sure and then compare even fields within the data to make sure that we're in agreement here. We had contracts in place that we wanted to make sure we're adhering to them according to the contract. And the only way we could really do that is look at the data, see how we were processing it, see how they were processing it, comparing that and look for any difference to fix them. Whether they helped us or hurt us, we wanted to just all be on the same board, that we were all confident that we're adhering to the contract. And a lot of work in that, but we dealt with data sets. I've dealt with a lot of data sets with millions of records in them, and I can picture exactly what you're saying. Every we'll call it a field, there's usually a column of data, and if you and in the industry I was in, those fields, those 3 digits, they could be letters or numbers. They would symbolize something. Maybe it was a certain location, maybe it was a certain individual, maybe it was a certain sex, maybe it was whatever it might be. But these codes were associated with certain parameters that then would impact how, for example, revenues were calculated, and or for example, expenses as well. So we would do this, and it makes total sense. So if somebody were to go in there and have a certain code that they knew in a certain column, for certain fields, that this code, let's just say, was AAA or whatever it might be, you would know that means something. And in this case, with our voter rolls, it sounds like there could be fields out there and certain codes in those fields that will identify and tell us this is an individual. If we're talking voter rolls, then this is an individual that's maybe not real, like you're saying, and therefore let's vote for this individual, or let's apply this individual to an actual ballot. So you throw a bunch of bogus ballots in, offer, let's say, Joe Biden, and then you need names to associate to those ballots. So you've got another 3, 4, 500,000 million, 10 million, whatever it is, names in these voter rolls that you know are bogus. You just select those names that say AAA, and then boom, you've got the individuals who voted. Here's the ballots. Now, voila, you've just generated 400,000 votes for Joe Biden.
And you understand it, Joe. In fact, what Andrew Paquette did, if you look at this paper on gods5stones.com, you'll see that we even figured out the encryption schemes. He has the number schemes by which things were renumbered. And when they put the votes back into the database to hide these false voters, they put it in by position. So they created a positional ID locator that is only known if you have the record locator algorithm record locator, which is a secret algorithm locator. So the criminals are really running the election because they can vote as many of these mail-in votes as they want. And because they're certifiable, they can't be challenged. They're going to count. And it's completely clandestine. Even the state boards don't know what's going on. But once we show you the codes and once we show you the mathematics of this, if you understand code cryptography, it's undeniable. This is indisputable evidence. And we're now getting it validated by some major cryptography groups that are saying, in fact, what we found is real, it's dangerous, and shouldn't be there. And we're saying we've got to get rid of these. First of all, if we get enough resources, we're going to do this in all the states. And we can run very quickly scattergrams, and we can show you that the counties the data has no relationship to data registration. So if the cards are shuffled, we know there's going to be algorithms here. And we're finding that to be common across the states. And we're also finding it in Europe. In Europe, the same thing happened. So that they have two ballots, and the conservatives won on the first ballot. The second ballot, they say, the left surged. And so the left suddenly won. Well, I called France and I called Italy. The surging wasn't in the polls. The surging was in the computers. They were taking these false votes that they hid and created. They were getting mail-in ballots, and they were voting and certifying the mail-in ballots. So it's a ingenious scheme, and I'm confident it comes from the intelligence agencies. I think the intelligence agencies are running elections around the world, and I think we can break that with, this whole effort at gods5stones.com that we've got going on. If people just take a look at it, spend some time reading it, assist us getting this done. We're wanting information from all the states. There's ways to contact us on the website. And if I'll even give out an email you can get my initials, JRLC, Jerome Robert, Louis Corsi at yahoo.com. I rarely give that out, but this is so important. We'll take information from everybody about the voting irregularities because we think we've got indisputable proof that our voter rolls at the state boards of election are encrypted with codes that will permit the Democrats to steal the election. And this is vital that we get this out there. JRLC at yahoo.com, and also go to gods5stones.com and read it for yourself. It's all the information there. That many podcasts are there. And Joe, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate the work you guys have done, especially the books you've written on voter fraud. You really understand it. And I compliment you because you understand it from the point of view of an auditor, which takes a special skill. And I appreciate your expertise.
Thank you so much. What I'm thinking about is one thing we noticed immediately right after the election, and I was popping out article after article, and some smart people started sending me stuff and working together. We started saying, hey, this isn't right across the country after 2020. And we were getting tremendous volume because nobody else was doing this. Nobody else was laying this stuff out. Look at this, look at this, look at this. And we were getting up to 5 million hits a day back then after the 2020 election, which is a huge volume for a website. And but I can remember we started seeing glitches, what we call them glitches. People would, on air, they'd show the numbers of Trump and Biden. They'd come back and then the numbers had switched. 30,000 was reduced from Trump and 30,000 added to Biden. And people, once you slowed it down, you looked at the numbers, you'd say, my God, about 5, 6, 7 days in a row, we're like, oh my God. And being an auditor, I'm like, man, I'd like to get my hands on the data set. And we did. There was a group that's a big group of Trumpsters that used to be on Reddit got kicked off because they were pro-Trump, and they started their own website. I think it was Trump.win, and they had a lot of great information. They had gotten a hold of this data set, and it's the first time I ever heard of it. It was the Edison data set, and this showed reportedly at the time, these are the official results that are being reported through the media, and this set came from the New York Times, and we started digging into that data set, and within a week after the election, we were dropping articles on this. And what we saw in numerous states, Jerome, which this really reminds me of, is the election was going forward, but there were some unique fields that was in this data set too. One was an expected end result. And you're like, why would you have that in a data set on an election? That's maybe something that I'm thinking they're using to perhaps massage the numbers. But what we saw is it would be Trump was crushing Biden in every one of these states, just way ahead. And then at about the 50% mark, there would be a bit of a change. You'd see Biden slowly, well, maybe not even changing, but at the 75% mark is where you saw rapid changes, big drops, especially, I guess it was at the 90% mark, we would see these drops of 140,000 ballots, all for Joe Biden and nothing for Trump. So when we charted this out, you'd see this big jump, and we saw these patterns in the data. And I guess that's the key here. There were patterns there that didn't make sense. So from an auditing perspective, I'm like, something's not right here. If you have patterns in data that shouldn't be there, that's not good. Or if you don't have patterns and it should be there, that's not good either. In this case, there were these patterns that made no sense. Then Biden would get ahead with these big drops, and we would see from the last 10% or so of the election, every single batch that was recorded was the same proportion, Trump to Biden, with Biden always winning, like 51-49 or 55-45. Every single batch after that. And we saw this in state after state after state. We reported that, and people are like, my God, what's going on? But we didn't know exactly how they were doing it. So I wonder if there is some sort of correlation to what you found.
Now we know how they're doing it. And what we've done is we found it in advance. So we're saying, if these codes are in the data, and we can show you there's a spiral code, it's well known in cryptography, and there's also, to resort them, it's a Caesar cipher. And these are well-known codes. We can show you how they were used. We can show it to the authorities. And the patterns you're talking about are produced by these codes. So we can mathematically demonstrate in these databases that they are rigged with coded schemes that intelligence agencies have evidently put there, and that they are, all the artifacts you see can be attributed to how these ciphers work. And since we found this in advance, what we're saying is we want investigation. We don't have to make allegations of voter fraud. We're talking about preventing it. So legally, we're on stronger grounds. We got the investigation started in Ohio by making an administrative complaint to the state Secretary of State. And he said he appointed an inquiry with headed by Brian Katz, who is the head of public integrity in Ohio. And we're now going through the Ohio official state voter registration. We're showing already that the deck has been shuffled, because the county scattergrams, there's only one where it's assigned by the number. When you come in, number 1, you get number 1. Come in number 10, you get number 10 voter. All the other counties in Ohio, it seems, are scattered so that there's no relationship between the day you register and the number you get, which means the numbers are shuffled so you can insert false records. So we've already demonstrated that the Ohio State database has been altered by these cryptographic schemes. And we can do that across the country. We're aiming to do it. And we're gaining momentum very fast. We're getting media like this show. But the key we've got, there's two differences here, Joe. One is we have it beforehand so we can prevent it. That's number one. And number two, we can demonstrate this mathematically. I can show you the ciphers. I can show you the renumbering schemes. These are not maybe or if. They are there and they permit, we can show you the false records that are created. We can show you how they can be used and then purged, how they're a false record, but they have a real state ID and they can be certified. It's a scheme that we've cracked, which is remarkable. Andrew Paquette cracked the scheme. It was a genius work. He's a computer genius. And you can see his work on the website. That major paper there, go take a look at it at gods5stones.com, the upper right-hand corner, where it talks about New York, different papers. Click that. You can read the paper that he published on the cryptographic scheme, and you can see it for yourself. This is not, and this is no longer disputable. We can prove this for fact.
What can you tell me about Mr. Paquette? What's his background, or is it on your site?
It's on the website. I want to tell you anyway. He is a computer graphics specialist. He did work in the Netherlands for years. He went to the Netherlands and taught. He's an American, born in America. He lives back in the United States right now. He is computer graphics. He did work on films like Spider-Man. His genius is that he can. Andrew Paquette, Paquette. He'd been working on the New York State database for 2 years before he found all this. He can conceptualize computer graphic space and topological space without doing the math. And so he's ideal because he can recognize patterns. 2 of his books were published by Springer on computer graphics, which is the lead scientific publisher in London. And he has a PhD from the London School, which is very prestigious in computer graphics. So he's highly qualified. And code breakers, in World War II, when we broke the Enigma code, Alan Turing, they put in the British newspapers crossword puzzles that were very difficult to solve. People who could solve those crossword puzzles ended up having unique skills in code breaking. Well, Andrew Paquette is brilliant in figuring out patterns. And I've worked with him now for months. And his analytic skills to decipher these codes are almost God-inspired. I don't know how he does it. But he also has a site where he talks about dreams and interpreting dreams. He sometimes dreams the numbers. But when he comes up with the formulas, we apply his formulas. Those formulas produce the numbers that are in the database. So we have the codes that produce the results that we can see in the database, which means we indisputably have cracked the code. We've done that in 2 states, New York and New Jersey. We suspect it in a bunch of others. And we're now investigating in Ohio. I spent last 3 weeks in Ohio, getting that investigation started. We want to do quite a bit more with the help of others in the field we want to aggregate all this information. Next week, I'll have another website out to aggregate all this voter information. And we'll pull all in what everybody's got. But the point is, if we focus on this effort, gods5stones.com, we can break the back of the mail-in voting fraud, which the Democrats are planning to use. Look, they got rid of Joe Biden because his numbers were so low it wasn't credible. And now they're gaslighting Camilla, saying, oh, she's ahead of the polls. They're setting it up so that they can say, oh, Kamala's surged. And then they can use all these mail-in votes that they've stacked into the deck fraudulently and certify. But we've got to make sure that this scheme gets blocked before it's used.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And they did the same thing back in 2020. They were saying Joe Biden's ahead of Trump, and he was sitting in his basement. We all knew it. I did a tally between Trump and Biden. Biden had a total of less than 2,000 people at all his events between Labor Day and the election. So here it is, Labor Day weekend now, 2024, and less than 2,000 people. Trump had 1.1 million at his events, and yet they were trying to tell us that Biden was up in the polls and then that Biden gets 81 million votes. And I think anybody with common sense knows neither one of those were right, and it was all they needed to do that then. So when they win or steal an election, then they can say, hey, look, he was up in the polls. This is no surprise. but it's not accurate. It's not true. It's just not, like you said, it's gaslighting and pretty gross. Yeah, this is pretty fascinating. How did you get involved in this, Jerome? Because you've got a
Well,
storied past. You've been involved in a lot of different things.
well, a lawyer in Ohio who's working on the voter registration problems got a hold of Andrew Paquette's paper to try to put it in a lawsuit. His name is Thomas Connors. He's with the Mendenhall law firm in Akron, Ohio. And Tom called me up and he said, this paper is too complicated for me. It's too much math. I don't understand cryptography. Well, I'm a PhD in political science from Harvard. I've been doing voting data since the 60s. It's one of my specialties. And also, I've studied cryptography. So I've written about cryptographic schemes. So the math came to me. It took me about a week. And I called Tom Connors and said, Tom, this is 100% rock solid. This guy Paquette is a genius. He's figured it out. And I ran the numbers. And then that was when I contacted Gateway Pundit. I did my first articles in Gateway Pundit. And by the way, Joe, I'll have another article after Labor Day for you. I'll continue breaking news in Gateway Pundit so we can build you back up to $5 million. We'll continue following this investigation along by giving you breaking news as we get it, and keep publishing it. Because we want to take this. We've got a limited time, but by the end of September, I want people talking about algorithms. Algorithms are mathematical formulas that you use to hide data. And that's how the encryption scheme is simply hiding the fake voters, where you know where they are and you can vote them and certify them, which is a critical it's not good enough just to create the votes. If you can't certify them, all certification is somebody with a real voter ID in the state asked for a mail-in ballot, got one, and ran it through the machines. And now, basically, this could be done all in the machines. It doesn't involve real voters. It doesn't involve real ballots. It involves, and you talk about the predicted numbers in it. All day long, I can be predicting how many of these Kamala needs to win. So if the turnout is big, I can use more of my mail-in fake votes. Just do it in the machine. Keep voting more of them. If I, so we've got to expose this so it can be blocked. And then we've got to make it so that they'd have to do so many of these. So turnout is important, because the more they have to make false votes, the more they have to use this scheme, the more we make people aware of it, they get caught. They can't use it. Their end game. Look, this is the worst set of candidates, Joe, that since 1968, when George Wallace picked Curtis LeMay to be his vice president. Curtis LeMay wanted to bomb everybody. He bombed the Japanese in World War II. He bombed the Germans. He wanted to go to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis with John Kennedy against the Soviet Union. He was mad and insane about bombing, and George Wallace was a racist, and that was the worst ticket. This ticket of Kamala and Waltz is worse, because you've got someone who's really unqualified. Kamala doesn't really have a sane idea in her head, and Waltz, who stole honor, which is to me absolutely disgusting. Why anyone would claim to have been in combat and not been in combat. That's such a disgrace to the troops that have bled and died for this country that it upsets me deeply. And how could the only way these two candidates, these are the worst two candidates. Democrats didn't want these candidates. They're telling you they've got this scheme so set that they could elect a dead guy. They could be Bernie, Weekend at Bernie, a dead guy be their president. Obama, and just use AI to make him look alive. That might be Obama's perfect candidate.
Maybe.
And this system,
you can certainly control.
And this system could elect them, because you could run it all on the computer and just continue, running. It'd be like a simulation. I mean, they're one step away from just doing a simulation and calling that the vote and throwing the votes away if they don't like them. They ultimately could get there, because even Klaus Schwab says they don't need voters anymore. So how did I get into this? Well, Joe, I guess people come to me with things, and because of my background, PhD, and my computer and my mathematical ability, this was one that I was able to say, this is real. And now I'm getting professional cryptographers to agree. We're taking it to a whole new level. But we've caught it in advance, and we're blowing the whistle before it's used. which means we don't have to make claims that, that will get us in trouble because we're not questioning past elections. We're not quite, of course, it raises a lot of questions about past elections. Some of these schemes have been in these databases since 2007. And if we get the money and the authority, I can go into the assembly code of these computers. I can tell you when these schemes were put in there. We can show you the purged votes that were used and then purged out of the record. Those will be a lot of the fake ones. We could do forensics on this and prove it to the nth degree. And I think the end result is going to be a conclusion which around the world, even in Venezuela, I see it, the same pattern. I think the intelligence agencies have taken over voting and they've decided they don't need voters anymore because they know how to cheat with the computers. And if that's the case, we may have uncovered the biggest voting fraud in history, and we're aiming now to prove it. And we will continue supplying you with information where you can get your readers up to date. You've got the backlog. Everything we're providing now gives context for why you saw what you saw during 2020. More people voted in this precinct than were registered. Well, okay, you can do that with mail-in votes that are fake. This precinct never voted this percentage for Democrats. Well, again, if you're voting fake mail-in votes, you can make that happen. A lot of things can be explained by the algorithms we've found. And so I think we've really cracked the case on this. I say we have decoded the Enigma machine of voter election fraud worldwide. We have cracked the code. And the people and we explain it in common sense terms. Gods5stones.com. Watch the videos, get involved. We want to make this a national movement. We can stop the steal. We got enough time to do it. With programs like yours and expertise like yours, Joe, we can make this happen.
This is brilliant stuff. I got to tell you, Jerome, so I've looked at this stuff quite a bit over the last few years. And the one question that goes through my mind, and I'll just mention too, there's been a number of groups of people that have gone out there, patriots that are trying to save this election because we knew something was broken in 2020, and it certainly was. And from my auditing background, and no auditor of integrity would have ever certified these results across the board in this election. And I've said that 100 times, and I stand by it. These results were so bogus, and then we couldn't even get in to look at them afterwards. They wouldn't let us in the doors and stuff. And I've done audits in communist China, and they provided me everything that I ever asked for in order so that I could come to a conclusion on whatever I was looking at. And yet in our U.S. election process, we can't even get to that. They lock up everything, block it off, have to go through courts to try to even get to the data where you could even audit it. So we've got to fix this before the election of 2024, like you guys are doing, because it's too late. Once the counting's done, it's over. We learned that in 2020. Nobody's there to save us, and they'll block everything again. And you're right. This is very sophisticated. These people, there's clearly seems to be some intel behind it. It's not just the U.S. Mike Benz has been on Twitter a lot, and Tucker, and he's been talking about basically what we've been calling the deep state, but how they control so much. They've been controlling information through censorship. They're controlling elections. And if you can control both of those, you could trick a lot of people into believing that a clown like Joe Biden, in my opinion, could win an election. I mean, he never won a primary before. All of a sudden in 2020, he takes a nothing made sense. And then we start seeing this data. One question, Jerome, we've got a little bit of time here. What about the paper? So this has been, and this team that I started, Fate 2024, we've decided let's do all we can to control the paper. So protect the paper, meaning protect the paper ballots. Don't let any garbage come in, and as best we can as observers and workers in these elections. That's the question. When these guys manipulate all this on a machine and do all that, doesn't there have to be, this has been my question, there has to be a paper amount that has to agree with it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you're on the right track, but see, they destroy the paper. So they take the ballots, mail-in ballots, and you've got the votes here in the pile, and this has the number on it. Then those get lost. So there's no forensic evidence in these things. That's another problem. Also, the uniqueness of what we're doing is we don't have the courts. Once an election's been certified, it's going to be very hard to get that court to give you standing to even hear the case. We don't have to go to court we can ask for administrative relief. We can ask for discovery. We can ask for state boards of election, the secretaries of state, to say, you've got criminal schemes potentially in your database. We want to know about that. We're asking to prevent a crime. We're not accusing anybody. We want to know if these are there. We can mathematically tell you if they're there or not. That's a fact or not a fact. And then from that fact, we can determine who put them there, why they're there, how they could be used. These don't require a court to do anything. This just requires us to get the data. And if we just get a hold of the databases, the voter rolls, we can probably run the cryptographs, the scattergrams. We can tell you which states look like they are embedded with algorithms. So there's a lot we can do, with the resources without having to go to the courts. That's what makes this so powerful, and why I think we can get it done in 30 days to convince the country that mail-in fraud has been put into the state board of election, voter election rolls, and the state secretaries of state, the people who run the boards of election, don't know it. And even if they saw the fake votes, they would look real because they'd have all the information. You'd have to go out and search for that person to find out that wasn't a real person. So this is a brilliant scheme. This isn't intelligence agencies. This is not some kid with his dad's computer that figured out how to do this. And the problem is, you can't just produce votes. You've got to get them certified. So you had to use this scheme in order to get legitimate numbers from the state voter ID system imposed on fake voter rolls that you knew were fake. That's the whole point of this system. And that's what they did. And it could only be done this way. And so therefore, when Andrew Paquette cracked it and I read it, I said, I got it now. And now my job has been to try to explain it to people, which is what I've been doing, as you know, Joe, with books and all the rest of it, and try to make it into terms where people can understand it. And that's why I'm imploring people to go to gods5stones.com. Just spend a half an hour there, and you'll be overwhelmed with the material. It'll hit you. Watch a couple of the videos and look at Andrew Paquette's paper. His paper's hard to understand, but for anybody who knows the math, it's definitive. And since, as you know, Joe, the thing about auditing is you're dealing with real results. You can't dispute auditing. If it's done honestly, you've got the records, and it can't be questioned. So that's.
And a point too that kind of, supports what you're doing is that in the corporate world, we have now legislation called Sarbanes-Oxley that we have to validate every single key process that impacts the financials. And in that process, identify those key activities that are absolutely necessary to be perfect. Otherwise, you could have problems with your financials so these controls, we call them, could be in the system. You got to make sure your system's working, or you got to make sure your process is working, that you've got chain of custody and things like that in place. We not only had to define all that for the major corporations, multinationals around the world, but then we had to test it every year. And we have to make sure and sign off on it that every single process is fine before we can sign off on the financials even. And that's a whole different set of activities. It's so important to validate our processes. And so what you guys are saying is, let's get these processes clean before the election and the data, so that we don't have to, to prevent any fraud from occurring in 2024.
And let us show you how the cryptographic schemes that are embedded in these state voter rolls turn off your controls. They turn off your controls, and they put false records into it. But the criminals know where the false records are, and then they vote the false records. So this is a scheme to vote false records, and they can vote the false records in millions. They can overwhelm an election with false records because of the brilliance of these codes. They've turned off all your control codes in the accounting, Joe. That's the goal here. And they did it brilliantly.
You talk about democracy, and then they continue to say democracy. Give me a break. Give me a break. They don't care about it. One last time, where can people go to get this information?
go to gods5stones.com. That's G-O-D, no apostrophe, G-O-D-S, F-I-V-E, spelled out, God's 5 Stones, plural, S-T-O-N-E-S, gods5stones.com. And by the way, that comes from the David and Goliath story where God instructed David to pick out 5 smooth stones from the brook, which were the exact stones used to get Goliath. We're trying to pick the exact stones you needed to get this voter fraud ended.
Great. Fantastic. Jerome, thanks for all you do and thanks for all you have done over the years for this country. And we really appreciate you being on here. Can't wait to have you back. I will go out there and look at those stories and look forward to hearing from you soon with more information on this. Thank you so much. Have a great Labor Day weekend.
And thank you, Joe, for all you do at Gateway Pundit. And we'll be working with you to continue to give you leads on the story to build the audience.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much.